Hello friends, and welcome to the 9th episode of Dulcius X Asperus. For anyone who's new to this channel, I'll go over some good news, some not so good news, and then give you some ideas for good deeds this week. It's been a hard few weeks. A tsunami or hurricane or tornado of bad news, pick your metaphor. It's easy to get angry and give up, but it'll take a lot more than rage and muscle to make good things happen. Today we'll cover an act of solidarity, relief for government workers, and we'll talk transgender. As always, you'll find a new song in the playlist and a lyric hidden somewhere in this intro. In good news for this week, the National Press Club is backing up the White House press pool. A little background here. Traditionally, the group of journalists covering the White House was chosen by the White House press pool. Despite its name, the White House press pool is independently run. Having an independent entity choose who is covering the White House means coverage is more fair and comes from multiple perspectives. Like all crises created by this administration, the story starts out dumb and gets dumber. Trump decided the Gulf of Mexico should be called the Gulf of America. The Associated Press chose to continue calling the Gulf of Mexico because one guy can't rewrite maps for the rest of the world. And in return, the White House said the Associated Press would no longer be allowed to cover presidential events. This is currently under litigation. The larger headline here is the White House is attempting to control the press pool to avoid critical coverage. But the good news here is that journalists are supporting other journalists. And while that doesn't seem like a lot, it really is. More good news for this week, or semi-good news, I guess. I could talk a lot about Doge and all that, but suffice it to say that lots of federal workers are under a lot of pressure right now. Many of them are in limbo because of extra-legal firings. This ruling will help. Among the blizzard of news over the past few weeks, you might not have noticed the executive orders targeting transgender people. The Trump administration reversed previous policies that allowed people to change their gender on their passport. Specifically, you can't change your gender if you've transitioned, or if you don't identify as any gender, you can no longer choose X. If you're not transgender or don't know anyone who is, this might not seem like a big deal. But imagine, for a second, that you're a woman who just got married and the government says you can't change your name. You had a life event that you felt like changed your identity and you'd like your name to reflect that, but the government won't recognize your new identity. Or imagine the opposite. You're a married woman who didn't want to change your name and the government forced you to. Either way, it would feel like a violation, like the government forcing an identity on you. As an aside, under currently proposed legislation, married women who change their name might find it more difficult to vote. But getting back to the main issue, this executive order doesn't come from a place of ignorance. It comes from a place of malice. Trump wrote in his executive order on transgender service members that adoption of a gender identity inconsistent with an individual's sex conflicts with a soldier's commitment to honorable, truthful, and disciplined lifestyle. This is a campaign against transgender people with predictable results. State governments dominated by conservatives are taking this opportunity to remove other protections for transgender people. I'm not going to talk about transgender people in sports right now. There's a lot to unpack there. But I do want to talk about biology and categories. Anti-trans activists will tell you the issue is simple. Everyone is either a boy/man or a girl/woman. When you try to define these categories precisely, however, things get tricky. Just ask Trump. In yet another executive order, Trump defined women as female, and female as an embryo that at conception produces the large reproductive cell, aka the egg. But early in development, all embryos are phenotypically female, so you could make an argument that by that definition, everyone's a woman? Putting dumb executive orders aside, what are some categories that you might use to cleanly divide people? Testosterone levels, maybe? It's true that men tend to have higher testosterone levels than women, but even so, some medical conditions leave women with testosterone levels in ranges typical for men. Let's think back to middle school sex education then. Does your body produce eggs or sperm? Could we use this to divide people cleanly into categories of men and women? No. If you were born with a uterus but had to have it removed, does that make you not a woman? If you're a man with a low sperm count, are you less of a man? No, and no. So we can't rely on testosterone levels or types of gametes. What about the shape of genitalia you're born with? Again, no. While most people have XX or XY chromosomes and genitalia to match, with approximately 8 billion people in the world, there are plenty of people who can't be categorized that way. Even categories like muscle mass to determine gender get messy. You might be thinking, okay, fine. Life is messy, but why should you care? Their problems aren't your problems, and you probably have some problems of your own. Everyone does. There's a scene I love in Tales of the City. It's a dinner party with a large group of gay friends. They use the word tranny, and someone points out how insensitive that is, and someone else gives this speech. This entitlement that you now have to dignity and visibility as a gay person, do you know who built that world? Do you know the cost of that progress? No, of course not. So if a bunch of old queens want to sit around a table and use the word tranny, I will not be told off by someone who wasn't there. It's one person in a persecuted group saying that their persecution gives them the right to ignore or participate in the persecution of others. It's history rhyming. Caitlin Cass's illustrated history of the suffragette movement has the same lessons. Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony worked with racists to push women's suffrage. Cass brilliantly illustrates her history with ghosts to show us how tolerating or ignoring past inequities haunts our society today. Transgender rights are part of civil rights, just like gay rights or women's rights or rights for people of color. Transgender people are actors, musicians, writers, and engineers. In other words, transgender people are just people. And yeah, there are some difficult discussions about what exactly fairness means in sports, but any discussion has to start by acknowledging their humanity and our communal obligation to respect that humanity. We talked about a lot of difficult issues today, so I want to close with this quote from Bell Hooks, as illustrated by Caitlin Cass. As uncomfortable and painful as these conversations are, you can think of them as a blessing. It's cliché, but true. The first step is acknowledging the problem. I've been watching my social media feeds this week explode with honest stories about how Elon Musk's Doge efforts are putting good work in danger. I encourage you to share your own stories if you can, not just about funding, but about how your world has changed since the election. It's hard to be vulnerable and publicly call out that the policies of an elected official are targeting you, but these are the stories that have always pushed civil rights forward. I was reminded of this reading Caitlin Cass's history of the suffragette movement. Expanding voting rights to everyone meant convincing people who had the privilege of voting that they should share it. Imagine being a civil rights activist and taking that leap of faith, showing your humanity to someone who participated in the system pushing you down. Which leads me to my second idea for good deeds this week. Listen to the stories of your friends and family. Keep an open mind. You might be surprised by what you learn. Until next time, take care of each other.